they're not actually disparate. They are quite similar. So when we say the Tao, now be it of Islam or of Confucianism or of Shinto, in essence, they're all the same. All right, thank you, and thank you to the students for attending this lecture. The outline of this is as follows. As if you heard, the title is Shinto and Islam. So you've just had the introduction. Going to briefly talk about my PhD project and then about the Tao, which some of you might have heard, and then a brief history of Islam in Japan, and then I'll talk about similarities between Shinto and Islam. Before I proceed further, please do feel free to let me know if I'm too fast, and if you're unable to understand something that I've said, I will try and clarify that. Second, do feel free to ask me questions, but the situation with that would be that it could diverge us from what we want to finish saying. I do very much welcome questions, but bear this in mind that, again, we could diverge because obviously it requires some things require explanations. Okay, so I'm going to proceed from here and talk about my PhD project. One more thing, if we are able to finish well in time and we have some time left, then you can ask me questions then. And if you don't have questions at that time, we'll play a little bit of a video related to the subject we're going to cover today. So about my PhD project, one of the chapters and one of the characters that I have in it, okay, it's in creative writing. I'm writing a novel. I have written a novel. I've got a thesis that I've written as well. So it's a two-component project. Now, one of the characters in my novel and a chapter dedicated to the person is Sasano Onodera, who, as you can well be able to tell, is a Japanese person. I'd always wanted to include Japan in a project that I would do in life, and it happened to be this one. I had visited Japan in 2016, but my exposure to Japan in terms of literature, not in terms of fiction, but in terms of reading up on Japan, that's what I mean by literature, and kind of observation of the people and the land from afar was quite intense, I would say. So so I included Japan in my project in short for a reason, which you will see by way of my discussion or talk today, the why of it. So in 2016, I was lucky enough to hike on the Magome Sumagu Trail, which is the Postman Trail or the Samurai Trail, as some say, in the Kiso Valley, which some of you would know about. Now, that route was inspiring because I'm going to be talking about Tao, like I've said in the outline. The Tao meaning, very quickly for now, the way. So the hiking along the trail was the way in physical terms, which was quite inspiring. After that, I went to Lake Ashinoko. There was the Torii, which is in Lake Ashinoko. And then I went up the Hakone in Jinja on, which is to the right side of the lake from 7-Eleven. For those of you who've been there, you can see towards your 1 o'clock, the great, beautiful mountain Fujisan. After that, I went to Mount Takao, not far from Hachioji. Okay, I did deliver a lecture at your university back in 2016 as well, and that's how I know a little bit about Hachioji as well. So I went to Mount Takao, and over there is a jinja called the Yakuo in Jinja, which again is part of my novel. which inspired me to develop a story with Sasano Nodera being the protagonist in it. Now, the reason why I mention these things is because for me, it was something of a spiritual journey. And because my novel is based on, amongst other things, spiritual journeys as well. So the Japanese setting led me, inspired me, and led me to compose a character as well as chapter on it, which then also included Mount Fujisan. So I'm going to refer to a few things on occasion on these aspects. Now, let's begin with Tao. Some of you are familiar with this concept or intuitive concept, right? So, but for those of you who are unaware or not, in depth aware of it, so I'll just go through it with you briefly. I'm not going to go into detail because it's a complicated subject, as you probably know. So Tao is a natural order of the universe whose character one's intuition must discern. So it's your intuition that needs to discern it. It's basically trying to say it's indescribable. You have to kind of feel it. Now, it says to realize the potential for individual wisdom, and that this intuitive knowing of life cannot be grasped as a concept. Rather, it is through actual living experience of one's everyday being. Now, the Tao here means effectively that you have to live a certain concept. What could that concept be? Now it says it's a way, a path, a route, a road, or sometimes more loosely, a doctrine, principle, or holistic belief. Would anybody be able to tell me what this could now mean? That it's a doctrine, a principle, or holistic belief? Would you like to chip in, or should I just continue?
Yeah, like I've heard about Tao since I was in high school in the class of philosophy, and the teacher say that this is a principle that human beings have to follow because it relates to human nature is good. Except yes, that's what I know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now basically it does talk about yin and yang, doesn't it? And it's got a connection between heaven and earth, and you'd find a similar concept in the Chinese, in the Korean flavors of the culture as well. But because we want to focus on Shinto and Islam, I'm going to try and link Tao with Islam. It's a doctrine, a principle, a holistic belief. Bear this in mind. Now, according to Murata, in her book, The Tao of Islam, she talks about three aspects or three realities that make up the Tao of Islam. One is God Almighty. Now, as you've heard the concept of God the Almighty over the last several weeks with your professor in this course. So that's the God we're talking about. We're not talking about Izuna Daigongen here or Princess, the Kami Konohana Sakuya, or some such. We're talking about the Almighty God, the absolute creator, as Islam explains it. The other great reality that makes up the Tao of Islam, according to Murata, is the cosmos. And the third is the human being. Now, in Islam, the central goal of Islam is the spiritual perfection of human beings. Now, when we talk about perfection, we do talk about physical as well as societal and in terms of justice as well and all of those things. But in the greater scheme of it all is the spiritual perfection that is the target. Now, here you can see in the Japanese ethic, which I will repeat later, but I just, for the sake of progression, it's pretty much governed by the Bushido Code as well as by Shinto, which has a great focus on care for the environment as well as the society, the human society. In likewise manner, as Murata says later on, which I'll show you, Islam has a similar attitude towards society as well as physical perfection. Now, we don't mean physical perfection in terms of the shape of the human being, that's already created, but by that I mean uh, a chaste existence, a, a chaste physical being, which then has an effect on the spirit of the human being. Cleanliness, for example, it is said in Islam, the Prophet said that faith, cleanliness or chastity is half of faith, meaning that it's from this that the rest of your spiritual journey actually banks on. If chastity is non-existent, then it's going to affect your spirit. Now, in a similar way, then, Islam, the Tao of Islam, according to Murata, is that each of the above qualities or attributes is manifested, but in different modes. And each can be seen as a replica of the original Tao, as we understand here, the natural order of the universe, whose character one's intuition must discern, but also about the doctrine, the principle, and the holistic belief that we need to understand what that is. Now, each of these, going back here, each of these can be seen as a replica of the Tao, and with the two fundamental principles, yin and yang, harmoniously present. Now, in Islam, if you link here with my second bullet point about the doctrine, principle, and holistic belief, in Islam, the Tao, the way, the holistic belief, the doctrine is essentially embedded in Tawheed. Again, I believe that's a word you have already heard and understood in the first few lectures of your course with your professor. So it's the assertion of God's unity, God's oneness. Now, if you might remember from your course again, a chapter would have been used to explain it, and that is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Qul huwallahu ahad, which means this is the first verse of the chapter of Surah Ahad or Surah Ikhlas, Surah meaning chapter, whereby Ahad means not one, because Wahid would be one. Ahad would be indivisible, absolute, seamless. So once that concept, that doctrine is understood, then we have these three things here: God, the cosmos, and the human being. The central goal being spiritual perfection of the human being towards God. You would have heard that as well in one of previous lectures about Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We are from Allah, and to Him is our return. We are from the absolute Creator, the necessary existence, and to Him, H capital, not that He has a gender, but again, we are from Allah, the absolute Creator, and our journey is back towards Him. It's like a boomerang journey. Now, if we understand that, then we understand that is the way of Islam, the route to Islam. If we look at this, these words here, the path, the way, the route, the road, that is the journey, the Tao of Islam. And towards what? The absolute being, back towards Him. The Arabic word here means making into one, as I've just explained. And those of you who know Chinese, it's probably, forgive my pronunciation of the Japanese terms and the Chinese terms, but it means the practicing one. Probably the pronunciation is she. Now, as the first and most basic principle of faith, Tawheed, or the unity of Allah or God, is the fountainhead of all theological thinking as well as philosophy, theoretical Sufism, and many other expressions of Islamic understanding. Without it, Islam is meaningless. It has no value to it. So Tawheed is the absolute essence of the belief system. It demands that all existence be governed by a single supreme reality, R capital. Like I've said, the necessary existence, wajibul wujud. That's in Arabic meaning necessary existence. Now, interestingly, the Chinese scholars from many centuries ago, which I will just refer to in a few minutes, had no objection to calling by the Neo-Confucian term principle, P capital, or Li. Now, this may be a bit confusing or unclear for now. It will become clear as we proceed. Please do bear in mind that a recommended read for understanding the Tao of Islam would be to read Sachiko. Again, she's Japanese, by the way. Sachiko Murata's Chinese Gleams of Sufi Light, as well as her book, The Tao of Islam, published in 1992. I'll proceed from this one. Now, the Tao of Islam, everyone knows, as those of you who are now a bit more familiar or might have jogged your memory about Tao, everyone knows the concept Tao has to do with the harmony of heaven and earth and the perfect balance among all the forces that drive the supernatural and natural world. But it is often forgotten that the Quran is also full of discussion of God's signs in the natural world. Now, this is where I'd link with the concept of care for the natural world, the concern, the pride that the Japanese people have, the Shinto religion has for the natural world. Now, that is Tao, but part of Tao. But when we look at Tao in its completeness, it's both the natural world and the supernatural world, and the metaphysics aspects of it. Now, here I'll briefly refer to, for those of us who are aware of about Shinto, about the afterworld or the other world beyond life or the life after death. Now, I understand that Shinto does not concern itself with the afterlife as such, but it does in a way. I know that Shinto takes its inspiration from Buddhism, but it's when it comes to the afterlife, it kind of stops itself from delving into it and it lets Buddhism talk about it. But it does refer to the afterlife as it has an influence in this current realm that we can experience in our consciousness. And that's what Shinto refers to. But interestingly, like Murata says in her book, Chinese Gleams of Sufi Light, Islam also talks, like Buddhism, like Shinto, about the supernatural and the natural world. It also refers a great deal to the idea of the balance of heaven and earth as its central message. Again, very quickly, if you look at these three things here, the almighty necessary being, the cosmos, and the human being, right? So this is the supernatural world beyond our comprehension, in particular this one. And this is the one that we can somewhat understand. Now link that with intro to the Quran or Islam's message, as is recognized by much of the Islamic intellectual tradition. Very interestingly, as you would see in a few minutes, the Chinese scholars had no difficulty seeing the idea of cosmic equilibrium as a shared feature of the traditions. Now, why do I refer to the Chinese twice already? The reason for that is that during my research for my PhD, when I was inspired to write about this Japanese character, it's a completely fictitious character. Sasana was the name, first name of a Japanese student I had about 12 years ago, and Onodera was the name of another Japanese student that I had 11 years ago. So I just mixed the two. It's a completely fictitious character I created. But during the course of my research, I realized I had to defend my chapter, and my supervisor would say that I'm going to justify it in my novel because it's a unique chapter. It's like Japan, your country. It's a very different land from the rest of the countries or lands in the world. In likewise manner, the chapter is unique, you know. So I just went on to finish my chapter, but then when I came to preparing the defense for creating it, I didn't have much answers at that time. So I went to do research about Japan and Islam, and it turned out that they were Japanese monks, students, scholars who went into China to study about Buddhism, to explore more, and they ended up discovering Islam in China. So we'll just talk about that in a few seconds. That's why I'm referring to China a bit. Now, going back to the slide on display, the purpose of Islamic cosmological teachings is to express within the context of the intellectual tradition the obligations of human existence. Again, it's a very important word here, obligations of human existence, which I'll explain. That is, to live in harmony with Tao or to submit. In the first few lectures, again, you would have been taught or shared with the concept of or the meaning of Islam. It's to submit. To submit to what? Submit to the absolute being, the absolute creator, without which existence would be impossible. The word impossible would be impossible without the necessary existence. So that's what Islam is. And this submission to the harmony is exactly the yin and yang that Tao talks about. So the point being here that Shinto, and now I'll introduce the word Confucianism, and Islam and Buddhism, they're not actually disparate. They are quite similar. So when we say the Tao, now be it of Islam or of Confucianism or of Shinto, in essence, they're all the same. So I'll repeat that bit here. The obligations of the human existence, according to Tao and the Tao of Islam, is to submit to the ways of the yin and yang of heaven and earth in order to establish harmony upon earth in general and within human societies. If I remove the word Islam from there, all of a sudden, it would read very much like how the Buddhists would teach it to you about Tao. And obviously, the source book I've written there for you, I've already told you about it, is The Tao of Islam by Sachiko Murata, published in 1992. So do please read it. Before I proceed further, it's a short article that I would recommend you to read for pleasure as well as for knowledge in your free time. It's by another Japanese scholar, Nabuo Misawa, 2011 published, and it's called Shintoism and Islam in Interwar Japan. How did the Japanese come to believe in Islam? Now, this article is what I would say was a serendipitous discovery for me when I was trying to find a defense for the reason why I coined the entirely fictitious, well, not entirely fictitious, because I did include facts of my travel through Japan as well as going into the Shinto shrines and talking about them. So it was half fact, half fiction, but the concept of it was, in essence, entirely fiction. And it's this article that helped me realize that actually Islam is not new to Japan, and that actually the character Sasano Nodera that I'd created had actually there was a real life, or there were several real life persons, but in particular a person called Ippei Tanaka who had actually had a similar journey as the one I'd subconsciously created, effectively subconscious. So I'd highly recommend that you read this article in your free time. So now the brief history of Japan. Now in Misawa, again, do pardon me for my pronunciation, I'm trying, refers to the prolific Chinese scholar Liu Ji. Now note the date, as far back as 1662 AD. I'm not very good at math, but that's about 350 plus years or so ago. The Chinese Muslim scholar, his life journey and learning of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism in his childhood is what Misawa refers to. Not just Misawa, by the way, Murata does too. Sachiko Murata does talk about Liu Ji in the 2000 version, The Chinese Gleams of Sufi Light. She does talk about the scholar in that work as well. Now, Liu Ji regarded Confucius and Mencius. These are sages or prophets who were there even before Christ. So that's almost 3,000 years, if I'm not wrong. I'll do the math again. I'm not very good at these things, the numbers. But it's 551 BC and Mencius, 372 BC. Now, Liu Ji refers to them as the sages of the East. The Chinese scholar of 350 years ago also refers to Muhammad in the same breath, as it were, as the sage of the West. So Confucius from China, Muhammad from Arabia, so west to China, or west of China. Liu Ji, by the age of 30, commenced translation and propagation work on Islamic scriptures, drumroll, using Confucian studies over 2 decades. Now, what happens in 1904? A Japanese pilgrim or monk or student or researcher or a thirsty being in search of the truth visits China to learn truth for him. All right, I understand truths are different for different people, but what would appeal to him as being the truth? That's what I mean. Principles remain the same throughout, but then the rules that are based on those principles change according to changing times. So going back, because of the concept, the aspect of principles, it might be perceived that Islam is unbending. But there are some things in which it is proudly unbending. For example, the concept of Tawheed, which you've just heard, the absolute oneness of Allah, the Almighty. So Izuna Daigongen, there is, as far as my understanding goes, is regarded, there are 8 million kamis in Shinto or more. And the question is about who is the absolute or the head kami of all of those kami. Now, this is a question that Sasano Onodera in my novel goes around to explore, which I'll refer to again towards the end of my discussion, my lecture here. It's a very short one. Now, we have Izuna Daigongen. Is he the absolute God of the world or only of Japan? It's a question. Now, during my research, I was unable to find a clear answer so far. The answer that I did see, obviously there may be another answer, but so far it is that Izuna Daigongen was the god of Japan. He created Japan. But here we're talking about the cosmos. We're talking about the unending universe, the infinite universe. Who is the creator of that? Okay, so going back here now, link it with what we're trying to say. Misawa states that although Islam is difficult to compromise and assimilate with other religions, apparently, however, Liu Xi and Ipei Tanaka's case suggests that it was possible to syncretize Islam with the Chinese belief system of the yin and yang, of Tao, the way. What is the way? And how do we link it with the Tao? It's according to the Tao of Islam that Murata explains, God, cosmos, and the human being, which, as you can see here as well, I lose my cursor, where is that? Yeah. Each can be seen as a replica of the Tao, a replacement, a substitute, another similar of the Tao in concept or intuitive concept. I mean, just like the Korean, I mean, it's fascinating. It's fascinating, just like the Korean script. You know, it's very simple. The essential concept of the script. There's a simple line of above and a straight line down and a line below that straight vertical line connecting heaven, human being, and earth. Tao again. So you see, these are similar. cultures. I just referred to the Korean script there. Okay, now going here to my point, which I would like to repeat. Misawa states that although Islam is apparently difficult to compromise and assimilate with other religions, Liu Ji and Ipei Tanaka, the Chinese scholar and the Japanese pilgrim, suggest that it was possible to syncretize Islam with the Chinese belief system, which was Tao. In other words, the Chinese belief system that Confucianism taught, Buddhism teaches, Taoism is about, and Shinto as well. Why? Because Shinto has drawn much from Buddhism if you study it a bit more. So, in essence, it's from the same source, it seems, the concepts coming forth. Ipei Tanaka found a relationship, next point, between Confucianism and Islam, as well as a relationship between Confucianism and Zen Buddhism. As a result, this Japanese pilgrim discovered the connection between Islam and Shinto. Thus, according to Murata 2000, Islam is not a religion entirely alien to the Far East, neither in terms of concept nor in terms of practice. Now, what are the similarities between Shinto and Islam? In Islam, we have one almighty power, which is called in Arabic Allah, but in Hebrew, it would be Elohim, which is a cousin language of Arabic, or vice versa. And in Aramaic, it would be out of these words in your prior lectures, in the first 4 or 5 lectures that your professor gave. So it's a similar concept there. So, but just the words are slightly different because of language or dialect variations. Elahi, Elohim, Allah, Ilahi in Arabic again. So that's the absolute necessary being. Question: does Shinto have a similar concept? Almost. But I'm still trying to discover if it does, because at a certain point so far it seems to go into a blur and doesn't touch upon that subject. Shinto has, like I've said, 8 million kami. Kami meaning gods, small g god. But is there an absolute kami? Question. Who controls all of these kamis, or directs all these kamis, or inspires all these kamis, or that these kamis take inspiration from? Because my character asks a question to a Shinshoku in the Hakone Jinja, the fiction that I created. The question that there are 8 million gods. How do they come? So, for example, it's about the concept of Ike Seratu Iru. How do these 8 million kami come together in the production of a single rice grain? The kami of water, the kami of warmth, the kami of light, the kami of air, the kami of the rice grain's most original grain itself. You just name it. Question mark. How do these different kami that have no intelligence, how do they come together to ultimately create a single rice grain? Is there an absolute force that directs them? Because if, look at yourselves, you're 9 in the class, how with your intelligence, and I'm not saying IQ and things like that, I mean your gray matter there, your brains, with the human intelligence present, you don't come together in consonance with one thing or about one thing. There are differences of opinion. Let's say you were 9 gods. Would you be able to produce a rice grain most originally? So in my search, I'm trying to find out, is there an absolute kami or the greatest kami over all these 8 million kami in Shinto that brings them together? The maximum so far I've been able to go reach is Izuna Daigon Gen. But even Izuna Daigon Gen has parts. So the eye produced something and the nose produced something else. It produced 4 or 5 other little sub-gods. By little I meant sub-gods. In any case, it seems that if we delved further into this, we would find that it may be that even Shinto has no choice but to arrive at a singular concept. Take the example of Soka University. You got the chairman, right? There's one chairman. There are not two chairmen. So that chairman is the boss of all of the other kami, the PVC, the vice chancellor, the PVC, pro vice chancellor, the directors of the programs, the other kamis. But there's one chairman. For it to all bind together, for it to run as one organization and not all over the place. So there has to be an absolute one power that supports the cosmic system. Other than that, let's look at the similarities here. Masjids or mosques, as you've heard. The word is masjid. There is a lot of reverence that is expected at a masjid in a similar way at a Shinto shrine. The silence, the quietness, the spiritual feel at a Shinto shrine. It's what you would experience in a masjid as well. Similarity. What's the similarity? Respect. Second, reverence. Third, spirituality. The other thing, going in to the shrine in a clean state. It's a similar thing that you would do to go into a masjid as well, or a mosque where the Muslims pray. The same thing between Shinto and Islam is about gratitude, thankfulness, and ikigai. Now, as the Japanese students there, you know what it means, I believe. And for the benefit of the others, it means your reason for being. Iki means life, and gai describes the value or worth of it. What is your life worth? Ikigai. What is the purpose of your existence? It must bring you joy and inspire you to get out of bed every day. Now, the link here I'm making is through this very gentle line I've put as follows. Islam says, or Quran, or Allah, the Prophet Muhammad conveyed this as the word of God. Allah says, the purpose, your ikigai, is nothing except to worship Allah the Almighty. Now, what does that mean? Should we always be in a state of prostration and in a serious state of mind as if we are in a state of prayer? That's not exactly what it means. It means your entire existence, the entire essence of your very being, anything that you do within and without, inside yourself and outside of yourself, should be for proximity, for closeness to Allah Almighty, a purpose that is divine, that is spiritual, ikigai. That's the value of you. Can it be any cheaper? Would you want? No, I'm just saying, all right? Would a person who has the concept of ikigai settle for something less worthy? The second verse here, if you see, indeed, Allah alone is the supreme provider, the sustainer, Lord of all power, ever mighty. Think the Ike Seratu Iri, if I'm pronouncing it correct. Yes, Ike Seratu Iru, about the production of a single rice grain. How would 8 million kamis come together without a single chairman directing them, let's say? Just like at the Soka University. In a similar way, Lord of all power, ever mighty, which is why I have this word here, the almighty power. We may not call him God in our language, but in essence, that force is the necessary existence from which all other forces derive their forces from. So now, when you have a supreme provider, Lord of all power, ever mighty, why would you not be grateful for everything that has been provided for you by him, H capital, the God Almighty? Now think of it like this. You see here, Ikigai, link it with the same, right? It's what brings you joy and inspires you to get out of bed every day. You go to sleep grateful for the opportunity, for having had a day in which you did nothing but worshipped him. In other words, did everything with a spiritual purpose, everything for gaining proximity to the Almighty. Remember the boomerang's journey. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Whether you like it or not, whether you believe in it or not, the fact remains, the moment you're born, you're not the same anymore. You grow into an old person again. Why do I use the word again? Because the old person mostly becomes weak and dependent, just like the baby that is born on others. So this boomerang's journey, this we are from the almighty power, and to him or to it is our return. When everything is done in connection with his purpose, which is of our spiritual development, why should I not be grateful? So, in essence, the Tao of Islam is similar to the Tao of Shinto, meaning the Ikigai, the value, the worth of human existence is to be grateful to the Almighty so that you can have full joy from within. Let's proceed from this. The other similarity that I discovered in my, which was quite a pleasant surprise as well, when I was in your beautiful land in 2016, was the Wuzu and the Chozu or Timizu. Or there is a pavilion, the Chozuya, and or the Tamizuya, which is the ablution pavilion that you have in the entrance to your shrines. I was fascinated to learn not just the concept, but actually, again, drum roll, the sequence of performing the ablution, the water cleansing, using the ladle and cleansing and the mouth and the hands and the arms. And that was fascinating because it was almost the same sequence as Muslims do, which is called wuzu or wudu. For this is the Arabic word for cleansing themselves before they want to pray, before they want to enter a masjid, masjid being mosque. Same concept, same performance. Amazing stuff. And I was like, this is so similar, dream come true. Because I'd like now link it with the first words I said. I was fascinated by Japan and I wanted really, I loved the way the Japanese would, take care of the environment and be and neat and meticulous about everything that they did or tried to do. And here is a common thing between the Shinto, the Muslims. Amazing stuff. Another common aspect between the Shinto and the Japanese, or and the Muslims, is respect for the dead. Now, the Shinto concept, like I've said previously, about the afterlife. It may not fully delve into the afterlife. It leaves it up to Buddhism to explain that. But the fact that the Shinshoku, the grand priests, are the other priests, the Shinto monks and pilgrims who go up into the shrines in the mountains, they go there for a reason. The reason is, as far as I understand, that when they pray, when they supplicate, when they wish and hope, they do so through the spirits of the dead. Why? Because they believe the spirits of the dead go up the mountains and find their paths into the other realm through those paths on the mountains and then return. So they seek, they pray through them for whatever it is that they pray. Islam has a similar-ish concept in terms of respect for the dead, just like the Shinto do, just like the Shinto or the Japanese do for the 47 Ronin, the samurais who literally lived, made their life an ikigai, made it valuable by living for justice, for purity, for no compromise in the face of evil. The Ronin, the 47 Ronin, same concept. Okay. Now, in a similar way, then, the Muslims pay respect to the dead, not because they worship the dead at all. They do not worship the dead. But there are some dead, or those who've passed on, who were divine, and they effectively become conduits towards the Almighty by His approval, not ours. We don't choose that. Allah talks about the martyrs in the Quran. I'll paraphrase the verse. Do not think of them as being dead. No, the martyrs are alive, but you do not see them. You do not perceive them because of the limitations of this realm. You can't see them. But those who have died in the way of Allah, of the Almighty, the Absolute, they are receiving sustenance from Him, but you perceive it not. So now this is where you may want to connect your further understanding of what I've just said with what your professor would have referred to or taught you in substantial detail, I think, about, for example, the great martyr Imam Hussein, who's considered the chief of martyrs, Imam Hussein bin Ali, Imam Hussein being the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. Same concept. He was slaughtered mercilessly because he stood up for the truth, because he said no to oppression, because he said, I will stand up for justice and to uphold the religion of my grandfather Muhammad and my father Imam Hussein's Ali alayhi salam. Now these, he and his companions, and amongst many others, they're considered martyrs. And to this day, your professor would have told you a bit about how his martyrdom is commemorated. So the commonalities between Shinto and Islam in terms of respect, not worship, respect for the dead and the martyred is common. Then the spirituality in mountains. I've already told you a bit about the Shinto concept of it, but if you read about any religion, be it Abrahamic or non-Abrahamic, you will see there is a common concept, and that is of spirituality on the mountains. Now, it's not because you go to a height and so you're now closer to God. There's nothing like that. You don't become closer in physical terms to God. That's not the concept. The concept, the reason why going up a mountain and praying there is more beneficial than anywhere else in certain contexts or occasions, is because there is more positive spiritual energy on mountains, because it's away from city life or where human beings are living and other beings, the jinn. I don't want to get into that concept, but that's very much pretty much related to I could venture. I'm not saying it would be authentic, but I could venture to link it with the kami, but not go there. So where human beings, if they're not, wait a second, please bear with me. You see the concept of Islam, live in harmony with the Tao, to submit to the ways of the heavens and the earth, which are based on justice. If you read the Quran, it talks about that the heaven and the earth have been created with justice and balance. And Allah also says in chapter number 25, you want to read that chapter, it's called the Criterion, Al-Furqan, meaning it is the criterion between the truth and falsehood. In it, Allah says, interestingly, He challenges mankind. I'm just going by the way. He challenges mankind. He states, travel as far and wide into the universe and try and find a flaw in the creation. You will not find a flaw. In fact, you will come back tired, but you will not find a flaw. So Allah, this is the paraphrase. So Allah had created the entire universe on justice. So that justice is what creates harmony in the universe. Otherwise, we'd all have collided by now. The entire universe would have collided. So bear this in mind. See, Tao is the natural order of the universe, similar to what I've just explained to you about through Surah Furqan, whose character one's intuition must discern, that is the spirit. Your essence must discern, must be able to tell, must be able to distinguish, to realize the potential for individual wisdom. This intuitive knowing of life cannot be grasped as a concept, rather it is known through actual living experience of one's everyday living. Now, this path, if it is negative, if it's full of evil, it's going to create negative spiritual energy, which is why, contrastingly, in the good masjids, in the good shrines, you feel the spirituality, because it's positive energy. In a similar way, up in the mountains, where there is no negative activity taking place for the most part, it's a positive environment. That's why people, prophets, sages, Confucius, Mencius, Muhammad, Jesus, you name them, Moses, they all went up the mountains to supplicate, to become closer to God, not in physical terms, because Allah says, I am closer to you than your jugular vein. So it's not about physical proximity or closeness, it's about spiritual environment. So the Shinto do likewise. You have Zazen, you have Zen activities. The Buddhists do the same as well. They go up in the mountains to practice. Why? Similarity. It's for spirituality. Talking of Zazen, let's proceed to. You might have heard this word by now in the course of your lectures with your professor. Salat, the ritual, the physical, visible ritual act of prayer. Salat or namaz in Urdu and Persian, Farsi. And Zazen. What is the purpose of Salat? And this is a concept. What is Salat? This is an entire, I don't know, 5 to 10 lecture kind of thing. Not to say that I know a lot of things to say about it, but it's that deep. Whoever can explain it very well would take a long time to do so. But the essential concept of the prayer, the ritual prayer, is to worship Allah. Now, what does that worship mean? Remember this word here, gratitude. The very first word that you say when you begin your prayer after in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the very first word you say is Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Alhamd meaning praise be to Allah. So you're being grateful, and you're being respectful, and you're being humble for all the ikigai concept that He has provided for us to live. Again, going back to the previous slides, you'd recall living that path, not just believing or lip service of it. Amongst the other reasons why the ritual prayer is conducted is to unplug from life, from the worldly life that we busy ourselves with, and is to plug with the Almighty towards whom our journey is. Zazen is the same thing. Unplug from your existence, worldly existence, and start focusing. It's a spiritual practice. Same thing. Now, very interestingly, in 2005, the first time I'm taking you elsewhere altogether, bear with me. In 2005, I visited Canada for the first time. My brother lives there. And on his way to work, he dropped me in Mississauga at Square One, which is a mile by mile long shopping area. I wasn't interested in shopping and buildings and products and things. I've never been to Square One, despite the fact that it dropped me in the middle of it. I came away from there and I just decided to walk around the neighborhood. So I crossed this very wide road at the risk of my life. I jaywalked across the road. And what do I see? Once I've crossed it, I see a signpost saying Japanese garden this way. I don't remember the name of the garden now. This is in Mississauga, Canada, Ontario. I'm like, I'm going to go there. This is it. I go there and blah, blah, blah. I discover just outside of a hut, like of a Japanese garden hut, there is sand on which they've drawn lines. Like, what is that about? I read about it. This is all for the first time. Now, Canada, I'm seeing Japanese Shinto or the Buddhist culture there. And I see these lines and I read up about them and I realize, I understand, is to create focus, is to collect the mind, drive it towards, by way of those lines, patterns that are made in the sand so that the mind can begin to focus. So it's a spiritual practice. There was one in which there were just these spirals that ended right at a center point, and it was that you're supposed to follow those lines in the sand so that you can reach a focal point. And that's when it hit me for the first time, 2005, September 2005, how common it is with Islam. You see, on the right side here, where my cursor is, it's the Hokimia. Again, forgive me for the pronunciation, but this is an aspect. One of the, where's my cursor gone? Yeah, you've got these lines here drawn, and then there is a pebble in the middle placed. This is to help create focus with obviously the patterns and then the earth, everything natural there, right? I realized, if you might have seen your professor, or if you've been to a masjid in Tokyo somewhere, or elsewhere in the world, obviously, you'll see that some Muslims pray with a clay item or clay stone placed in front on their prayer mat. There are several reasons for doing that. But the one reason I'll connect with Shinto, because you see, you would have seen in clips and news and in your observation that Muslims, like the Japanese, by the way, they pray with their forehead placed on the ground, which is in full form, the ultimate form of prayer or supplication. It's called prostration or sajda in Arabic. They place the crown of their forehead, not just the forehead, the topmost part of the forehead, the pride, the ego of man and womankind, of man, on dust in humbleness towards the Almighty. But while they're standing, they're not supposed to look anywhere else. But in that focal point that you can see here, your professor would have a tablet, a small one. Your professor would show it to you too if they are able to. This is nothing but mud formed into a clay tablet so that the supplicant, the one who prays, can put his forehead on that. But while they're standing, they're supposed to look at a focal point, bang in the middle in front of their nose, right there, as is placed on the prayer mat. Very similar concept. to the hukime or hukimi, to create a focus, to unplug from everything else in a state of zazen and bring your focus towards a focal point. And what is that focal point? That focal point is not God, but that focal point for you, the focus towards God. It's very interesting. So it's these kind of things that drove me to understand Shinto or the Japanese, the Buddhists and the Buddhism. They're not dissimilar to Islam. And then it's just not me saying it. Confucius said so. Mencius also effectively said so through Liu Ji, a scholar of Buddhism, who said Confucius and Mencius were sages of the East. Muhammad was a sage of the West. Basically, they talked about the same thing. The reason for that being the source of all pure knowledge is one, cannot be two. So that's what I have to say for now. I think I'm pretty much in good time. Do you have any questions for me, people?
Question is, people who believe in Shinto, so they are considered to be Muslims as well?
Okay. Anything, any existence out there, whether it agrees to it, accepts it, or acknowledges or not, is in essence submitted to the Almighty. So in the very core and essence, they are in a state of submission. Now, who is a Muslim? One who submits. To whom? The Almighty, the absolute power. Now, what do I mean by in a state of submission? I'll give you an example, if you'll bear with me. Because I try and explain things philosophically, and I know these students these days want things directly answered with instance, but bear with me, please. There is a couple who has a firstborn who is severely disabled, let's say. The same couple has a second child who is perfectly all right. Question. If it was the Kamal, the if it was the great capability of the same couple to produce a perfectly healthy second child, how and why could that same couple not produce a perfectly healthy first child? And they themselves are healthy. What it tells you shows you how much control you have over things. What it shows you is how much you don't have control over things. If you could have the second one fine, why not the first one? It shows you how much you had control over things. That, in whether the couple like it or not, is effectively submission to the will, the decree of the Almighty. This is how it was meant to be. Now, one could argue, could make scientific explanations. It's because of a chromosome missing or a genetical this and that. Wait a second. These are explanations, but they don't explain away the concept I'm talking about. It doesn't explain away the essence, the factor that yes, there is a chromosomatic this and that, or a congenital this and that, but why could the couple not do the chromosomatic combination right the first time? Right? So you can explain things scientifically, but those things don't explain away the creator, the almighty power behind all things. So now, when you realize this, somebody might rebel. Somebody might say there is no God. Somebody might say, oh, there is God. In either case, they both have to submit to the fact of the first child being disabled and the second one being fine, healthy. That's a submission, whether you like it or not. You can't change it. You can try and go for treatments and all, but they may or may not work. In a similar way, when an animal eats grass in the plains of Africa, somewhere in Kenya, it is submitting to what it was meant to do, to eat grass and not meat. But the carnivore eats not the grass, but the meat of this animal. They are submitted to what they were created as. So, in essence, now, are they Muslim? What's a Muslim? Question, right? This is one who submits. So, they are submitted in essence. Islam is acknowledgement of the existence of the creator. So now the Shinto and the Muslim or Islam person, they may not acknowledge it, they may deny it, but in essence, they are in that unilinear journey back towards him, which is a submission, whether they like it or not. The only difference is acknowledgement. This is why there is the concept of declaration of the formula, La ilaha illallah. You say it so that you can hear it, and so that your spirit can respond to it, so that you're making this acknowledgement, both in terms of your whisper inside and as well as on the outside, both in terms of a ritual performance. Now, the differences that we see among physical rituals that the Shinto might do, you will see they're not very dissimilar either. They do prostrate on the ground. They do kneel. The Muslim does the same. Now, what it is that over time, the rituals began to vary according to the need and understanding of the people of those particular times, which is why Islam encompasses, you will notice, all other religions, and the Abrahamic religions in particular, which is why you will see commonalities. Now, they were Muslims too. Moses was a Muslim. Jesus was a Muslim. What does Muslim mean? The one who submits to the Almighty. So is a Shinto person a Muslim? In their very frame and essential system, they are. Do they acknowledge it? Question mark. Now, I've got some excerpts from my novel, which I'd like to share with you. Obviously, this slideshow or PowerPoint will be shared with you by your professor onto your portal. And I'd like you to listen very, very carefully to the mental state my fiction character, Sasano Onodera, experiences as he grapples with the concepts of spirituality, with the concepts of Shinto and Buddhism, and all that he's taught over his life. Listen very carefully to the questions he's putting.
Sasano had always been curious. Even at the Chugako and Kotogako, junior and senior high schools, he often found it hard to simply accept what he was taught. He so wanted to ask questions, but he was merely a pupil, and there was supposed to be no room for doubt that his teachers knew best in everything. That is why they were teachers, his mother, Yuko, would say. Besides, questioning their teachings of wisdom would be considered a sign of disrespect. And then there were the things she and Yuya, his father, taught him at home and when they regularly took him to the shrines and ritual ceremonies. Sasano never actually knew why they did what they did there. The chanting, bowing, kneeling, clapping, drumming, the special long tunics together with the headgear and swords that the various Shinshoku and their disciples wore, but he dared not appear to openly challenge anything. By the time he was 10, Sasano was convinced that it was his mental and experiential inadequacy that was his handicap, his impediment to comprehension, and not the wisdom of the sages. So he must learn to be patient until both time and the benevolence of a kind spirit will bless him with the wisdom of a kami. This conviction continued until the age of 14 when he left Magome in his native Kiso Valley for Takao Machi, some 300 kilometers to the south. At Takao Machi, he would enroll to study at the Yakuo-in Jinja, which nestled with quiet dignity up the almost 2,000-foot high Mount Takao. Legend had it that Princess Konohana Sakuya had once come down to the shrine at the mountain to personally enlighten a restlessly curious monk, who then went on to become a grand Shinshoku. Yuko hoped her son too would meet the same serendipitous fate. At Yakuo in Jinja on Takao-san, the spirit of Izuna Daigon Gen, which possesses elements of 5 deities, will protect and bless my Sasano, Yuko would say. Yuya would smile at his wife's proposition for their son. And if Princess Konohana Sakuya does not directly bless him herself, the Tengu will. They will carry messages from her directly to him and with their fans sweep away the evil spirits that seem to poison his mind. Yuko would insist. Yuya's eyes would gleam as he admired Yuko, not only for her geisha-esque allure, but her wisdom too. The Tengu, the long-nosed demon-like creatures erected at the Jinja, would certainly protect their son, he agreed. Within the first 3 months of taking residency at the Jinja's seminary on the usually mild, sacred mountain, Sasano's life took a dramatic turn. He was out on the summit of Takao-san, sitting on a rock flat jutting from a ridge of the mountain. He was practicing zazen in the direction of Fuji-san along with his newfound friend and senior monastic Akiara Kobayashi, who had joined the seminary only 2 years before him. During the ritual, while Sasano's body was still, his thoughts were like shooting stars. Why am I doing this? What is the purpose? Is it all about myself? And if it is, to what end? So if I perfect myself, my mind, body and soul through these rituals, what happens when I die? What is the perfect state? Does all this meditative effort die with me? Is it all about the here and now only and a decomposing body afterwards? And where will my spirit go? He felt like one who kindled a fire, but when it illuminated the space around him, his light was suddenly taken away, leaving him in utter darkness. He did not know how much time had passed like this when Akiara's whisper in his ear returned him to his physical realm. "Hey, you little Shinshoku, do you know about the Aokigahara, that thick forest over there at the northern base of Fuji-san? Right over there. You can just about see its edges from our spot. It's where some defeated monks, Shinshoku, shoguns and samurai used to go and commit suicide from shame or guilt if they were unable to maintain the Bushido code for any reason. They probably still do." This information seemed to Sasano to be linked to his thoughts of the previous hour. Had the sages also struggled with questions like his and then found no clear answers? Had they also noticed the inherent contradictions in what was taught? And thus, confused, had they decided that the bargain that they thought they had made all along with their numerous gods was going to bring no grain? Sasano felt that it was not actually Akiara who had interrupted his meditation. Perhaps it was Princess Konohana Sakuya who had used the senior trainee monk as a medium to stop him from overthinking at this stage. Sasano was about to ask for more information about Aokigahara and the wise men, who, despite their acquired inner peace and wisdom, chose to arrest their life in the forest. But he found Akiara looking a little pallid while packing up. "What's happened?" Sasano asked. "Look, dark grey clouds are setting in," Akiara said. "Hurry, we must return to the Jinja." Why hurry like this?" "Omen." Even before Sasano could get up, A most vicious bolt of lightning and thunder hit Mount Takao-san. Never in his life had he experienced such fear as on that evening. By the time he reached near the jinja, terrifying gales had begun to blow. Some trees bent acutely. Occasionally, some of their branches broke off and crashed to the ground. It seemed to him then that the evil spirits had come down in a final crusade to destroy the world. They growled as they made inroads, but he imagined so did the jinja's tengu. Bolts of lightning momentarily revealed their snarling faces, their incendiary eyes and their fangs. Rain sprang through the air and poured like spit down their mouths. Whenever a flash of lightning lit up the jinja, Sasano thought a tengu had leapt into the air and struck a swooping evil spirit. He watched this thunderous battle crouched by a stairway. He was drenched and too stunned to disgorge himself from his refuge and run into the jinja. Just 7 steps up the stairs, 4 paces through the torii, and safely into a little alcove on the right. Somewhere in the distance, the mountain range continued to reverberate from thunderclaps that tore like invisible Shinkansens across the skies. Sasano trembled at the thought that they were traveling that fast in order to go around the earth and return over his mountain in a flash. It was as if their sole mission was to keep him relentlessly terrified. He screamed. But he couldn't hear himself. He covered his ears in dread of death. Lightning had almost snatched away his sight. Every time it lit his surroundings, he felt he should make a run for cover up the steps. But when darkness instantly enveloped him again, he would freeze. But then abruptly, a very different thought crossed his mind. If whatever great power that was behind the storm willed it, it could have completely taken his hearing and sight long ago. Invisible, undefinable, yet the great power felt extraordinary, much larger, and in possession of an all-encompassing might. Now he felt its embrace. He felt it could easily and instantly prevail over every other spirit that seemed to be engaged in the battle around him. But it didn't. It seemed to bide its time. It seemed to be teaching him something. This intense feeling triggered a strange tranquility, and a mysterious warmth spread within him. Just at that moment, he thought he heard a bone-chilling shriek. "Akiara! Where was Sensei Akiara?" Another bolt of lightning struck the mountain. Sasano thought he saw his friend among the trees, as if grappling with something. Why had he gone into the forest again? Or had he lost his way? But how could he? Sasano wondered. A long, twisted tree branch landed in front of Sasano before quickly getting swept away by a gale-force draft. It looked like the tongue of an evil, bat-winged flying reptile. Had another one just been beheaded by a tengu? Were the tengu now beginning to win? Had Sensei Akiara become a tengu to fight the evil spirits to protect the younger monk in his care? Sasano laughed nervously as cold drops of rain fell on his face. After what seemed like a night-long combat, an eerie stillness descended upon the earth. Sasano thought the end of time had come to pass. All the lanterns of the jinja had perished in the attack, leaving the mountain in a tense, coal-like blackness. Only cold rain incessantly pelted down, as if now to cleanse the battle site. It felt that a minute had passed just like this. Then, without any warning, like a galactic matchstick was scratched upon sulfur, the earth lit up again and remained iridescent for 2 seconds. The verdant mountain range, torn trees, plants, fallen branches, twigs, dead birds, the jinja, all became visible in full color in that blast of light. Sasano thought it was the earth's last spurt to clutch at life before it died. But soon enough, deafening thunder returned and tunneled through the crevices and peaks of the mountain range and back up into the mountains. Sasano covered his ears again and shut his eyes. Another bolt of lightning shone across his pale face, and then another roar of thunder bounded among the mountains, this time sending tremors down to Takao-san's very roots. Just then, something struck Sasano's head and knocked him out. The world that Izuna Daigongen, the Kami, Yuya and Yuko Onodera-san had created for him ended at that instant.